deviating from the faith, or in other ways defying, the traditions. How you dress, whether you wear makeup, whether you date non-Muslim boys. Women are being killed in America under this code of Sharia. And we have been largely turning a blind eye to it. It's even worse, and I should have made this point perhaps more explicitly earlier. If you want to see where this takes you, this whole program, you don't have to really look much further than Europe. Because it's an incubator for this stealth jihad. Everything that I've talked about here is happening in spades and is making real inroads. Just as an example, there are now 87 Sharia courts operating side by side in Great Britain with English common law. There are now 750 what they call zones sensibles urbaines in France. No-go zones. And many of them are springing up in other nations of Europe, places where the authorities dare not go, where, as a practical matter, you have Muslim-only enclaves in which Sharia is the law of the land. Nicolas Sarkozy, the president of France, took a lot of credit recently for enacting a ban on the burqa. Did you hear about this? Well, unfortunately, that ban is not being enforced in those 750 no-go zones in France. Sharia is the law, and people are wearing the burqas, full face coverings, and of course, practicing Sharia law. So my point is this, that there was a meeting of police authorities from around Europe, a year or so ago, I think it was now, in which they came together and they started talking about this honor killing business. And they realized in most of those countries, there were instances in which they were failing to recognize murders for what they were. They were treating them as simple homicides when in fact they were honor killings. Hundreds of cases. So intimidation is a real thing, and it's why I come back to that sort of last point. We need to be empowering Muslims who don't want Sharia any more than the rest of us do. I think I said it at the outset. They are the natural antidotes to this toxic antibody inside our system. But if we keep reaching out instead to the Brotherhood, if we keep legitimating the Brotherhood, if we keep holding them up as the authoritative leaders of their community, it just makes it that much harder for anybody apart from the very courageous Sudi Jasser to stand up and be counted. You want to ask a question?
Hillary Clinton's one of her top staff members, Wiener's wife, is a pricey Muslim, and her mother is very active in the Muslim leadership. Secondly, 2 weeks ago, I just read that in the House Subcommittee meeting, that Janet indicated they had questioned her about one of the board members, new board members, who was a Muslim, who had access to the top secret information of Homeland Security. And 3, I just read the other night that a young man in a class had a cross on his wrist, and the teacher said, cover it up. And he said, he showed his cross, he says, look, I don't want to do that, but he showed his cross hanging on his neck, and the teacher and 2 students killed him. I'm just saying, if the leadership of our government is supporting them, it's so hard. We're working here, and someone is giving them the prominence at that level.
Thank you. I don't know about the third. Was that In the United States, or was that someplace else?
I was in Egypt.
Okay. The cops.
It wasn't in the United States.
Okay, no, well, the cops are getting killed in a lot of different ways in Egypt at the moment. Huma Abedin is the young woman that you were referring to, the deputy chief of staff of the Secretary of State. Her mother is, as you say, a prominent Muslim sister, I guess you'd call her, in Egypt. Her brother is also a prominent Muslim brother in Egypt. When the Secretary of State went to Egypt recently, she actually made a pilgrimage to see the mother at her university and speak to a group there, and impressed upon them how important and sensitive the position was that Huma Abedin holds in her top staff. I don't think it's an accident, comrade, as the Soviets used to say, that the State Department view is very favorable to the Muslim Brotherhood at the moment. I think similarly you can argue not necessarily because of Huma, but because of others that are being used as interlocutors for people like that Lieutenant General Jim Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, that he's being told that the Muslim Brotherhood is largely secular, has eschewed violence, is given to charitable works, and don't need to worry about these guys. In fact, you may remember this. It got a lot of attention for a different reason, but Janet Napolitano, of whom you spoke, and John Brennan, the President's Homeland Security Advisor, and this fellow Clapper were on Diane Sawyer's program back shortly before Christmas on ABC News, and she was asking them about the terrorism threat at Christmas time and yada yada. And it got a lot of attention because the same character, Clapper, had to acknowledge not once but twice that he didn't know that the Brits had just rolled up a major terrorist operation that was about to blow things up that had been revealed earlier that day. It was kind of embarrassing. But the thing that caught my attention was something he said apart from that. He said, as part of his sensitivity to the Muslim outreach business, that he regarded the Muslim community as a source of, quote, advice, counsel, and wisdom when it comes to ferreting out radicals in their midst. Well, again, I mean, if you're relying on agents of the enemy to tell you, and regarding them as sources of advice, counsel, wisdom, well, the intelligence, as you may know, has a term for this: garbage in, garbage out. And that's principally what we've got. You're talking about Mohammed El-Diari as a member of the Advisory Council of the Department of Homeland Security. And this is a Muslim brother. No question about it. He was recently tagged by one of my colleagues, in fact, one of our co-authors on this Team B report, as having provided some of that sensitive information to hurt Governor Perry in his campaign. And it's put sort of a focus on a very bad actor, but it raises a larger question about, again, how are we differentiating between people who should be part of the advisory team and people you don't want anywhere near. Donna is trying to get this microphone back.
We'll do one more.
Frank, how do we, in our own city, determine those who are Muslims who come to this country because of America and its freedoms, that do not want Sharia, and those that do not? Now, I say that because, as you know, we have the largest Bosnian Muslim population here in St. Louis of the United States. We have a big Sudanese and a lot of Somalians here, all of which are very much engaged in the jihad. Just today's paper had one of the Somalians was convicted of sending money to the jihadists. So how do we know, and how do we be good citizens in reaching out to our neighbors who may be Muslims? How do we know, are they the good guys or the bad guys?
This is a great question. It's a good one to finish up on.
It's very hard to find a Vietnamese.
How do you know whether people in the Muslim community are part of the problem or potentially part of the solution. This is made more difficult, to say the least, because of a couple of things. One, Sharia is rooted in the Quran, the Hadiths, accounts of Muhammad's life, the Sirah, other stories from the origins of the faith. The fatwas, the rulings of the clerics, the rulings of the caliphs, the traditions, the interpretations, and so on. This body of law and practice and institutionalized doctrine has been around for, the better part of 1,200 years or more. And so those who do not subscribe to it have the problem that they are considered, not only, as I said earlier, apostates, but most of that material supports the other view. So that's one problem. The closer they are to the traditional practice of the faith, the more likely it is they're going to line up with Sharia. A second problem is under Sharia, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, there is not only permission, there is an obligation to lie for the faith. In Arabic, it's taqiyya. So when somebody comes to you and professes to be on your side, are they? Or aren't they? As to the population question, let me just say this. My experience and belief is that most of the Muslim populations that came here prior to about 10 years ago or so, roughly, were primarily Muslims who came here to get away from Sharia in their own native lands. Oftentimes they were professionals. They were people who had had a hard experience with it. Zuhdi Jasser's family is a perfect example. They wanted to get away from it in Syria. And part of why he feels so strongly about not letting it come here is they wanted to leave it behind, to come to a place where freedom of religion, among other things, was practiced. So